Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Start everything with the name of Allah, the most gracious and the most merciful. Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to you all in the HemeCon 2021 nursing session. I am Sadaf Nawaz. I am a bone marrow transplant nurse from Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. Thanks to President of Pakistan Society of Hematology, Major General Pervez Ahmed Hilal Imtiaz Military for planning and organizing session for nurses in HemeCon 2021 for active and interactive learning. Thanks for empowering us, sir. Over to General Pervez.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you very much for asking me to say opening remarks on this conference that is going to be very practical and useful, not only for the nurses, for everyone who has got some interest in the subject of heme-oncology and bone marrow transplant nursing. I keep on saying that the outcome of patients with hematological disorders and bone marrow transplant is directly proportional to the expertise and patient care of the nurses. And the professional competence of the doctors and the nurses, they complement each other in the outcome of patients. They cannot be taken in isolation, but I would say the major component of the outcome and patient care is dependent upon the how good is the nursing care. Now the individual has got certain strength, and strength of each individual depends upon the professional competence as well as the character of the individual. This is what I keep on saying to my students. Most of them, they are sitting here. Professional competence would give you the strength. It would strengthen your character and your professional rise. You will be more confident. You will be more, empowered by your superiors and by your consultants. And it is heartening to see the development of the bone marrow transplant nursing and coming to a stage that we are hosting, mashallah, independent nursing session on the bone marrow transplant nursing. And I'm sure that the talks will be useful for improving the patient care, and it will be interactive and give boost to our nurses to learn more and to be more participative. And thank you very much. Wish you all the best for your session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. This is the first ever virtual nursing session thanks to Pakistan Society of Hematology. On the behalf of Pakistan Society of Hematology, I heartily welcome our expert panelists, speakers and audience for sparing their precious time. So we have three honorable panelists. Colonel Mehreen Ali Khan, she is consultant hematologist and bone marrow transplant physician from Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. Colonel Tariq Khattar, classified pediatrician and bone marrow transplant physician from Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. Major Rizwana, a senior transplant nurse, and she have a vast experience of bone marrow transplant nursing. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have 4 talks and 2 free paper presentations today. A confidence is the celebration of knowledge. First of all, I would like to invite Ma'am Najia Gul. She is a bone marrow transplant nurse and infection control nurse as well. She has competent, confident and dedicated attitude toward her profession, providing her services currently at Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. She will sharing her research on complication associated with central venous catheter. Over to you, Ma'am Najia.
Thank you, Ma'am Sadaf. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I start my presentation with these words. The real revolution is the evolution of consciousness. I am Major Najia, bone marrow transplant nurse in Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. Today the topic given to me is the care of the central venous catheterization in the patients undergoing chemotherapy and stem cell transplantation. So the central venous axis is the backbone of the bone marrow transplantation and chemotherapeutic protocol. It has direct bearing on the success and the favorable outcomes of these specialized treatments and modalities. Despite of being the safe procedure, still the placement of the central line is associated with number of complications. Now the central line is indicated for the chemotherapeutic and conditioning protocols, long-term intravenous antibiotics and other medications, for the frequent blood draws, for apheresis, for the monitoring of the central venous pressures, and for the long-term parenteral nutritions in the end dialysis. These are some catheters. This is the Hickman catheter. These are the central venous catheters, single lumen, double lumen, and the triple lumens. It's a PICC catheter. Now, which central vein is to be cannulated? Mostly subclavian veins and intrajugular veins are used for the central lines and very few for the femoral veins. It's an internal jugular vein. And in this picture, we see now the complications associated with central lines are very dreadful. It might be infections, hemorrhage, malpositioning, in sometimes blockage, air embolism, leakage, line breakage, and sometimes pneumothorax. This X-ray shows the malpositioning of the central line, and this X-ray shows the hemothorax. The objectives of my study is to determine the safety of the central lines and the complications associated with their use in the patients undergoing chemotherapy and the bone marrow transplant for various hematological disorders at the Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. Total 1,000 patients who had the central line placement for the different indications were included in this study. All the observations were written in the specifically designed performers. In 312 patients, central lines were placed for the bone marrow transplant, while in 441 for the chemotherapy. For 190 patients were passed central line for the venous axis, followed by 4621 for ATG and apheresis. Similarly, in 808 patients, central line was placed in the right side, while in 192 for the left side. 706 patients have the subclavian central venous catheter, while 96 have internal jugular vein, and none of them for the femoral vein. This pie chart shows the disease distributions. About 135 patients of AML have the central lines, while 100 patients of ALL have central lines, 116 for aplastic anemia, 63 for beta thalassemia, 28 for CML, and 59 for the other diseases. This biograph shows that 773 patients have the central lines, while 29 were Hickman, 2 were PICC, and 1 for Potockath. This biograph shows the mean line days, 36 days for the Hickman and 29 for the central line. So 61 patients have the central lines in the local anesthesia, while 321 were given the general anesthesia. 652 central line were passed in one attempt, while 226 were passed in 2 attempts, followed by 5827 in 3 and 4 attempts. 211 patients have the complications of systemic infections, while 62 central lines were diagnosed for the positional flow, 23 for catheter colonization, while 32 for the leakage, 46 for the blockage, 21 for bleeding, 13 have the accidental removal, while 5 have malpositions and 3 have the pneumothorax. In 113 patients, the blood cultures were positive, while in 29 patients, the CV line tip cultures were positive, while in 22 for the CV line fluid cultures were positive. And the 49 cultures were positive for the Staph aureus, while 24 for Pseudomonas, 14 for Klebsiella, and 22 for E. coli. The reason for the removals, 628 patients, in 628 patients, central lines were removed at the time of discharge or in some cases for death, while in 28 they were removed for blockage, and 45 for proven line infection. The accidental removal were in 16 patients, while 178 lines were removed for suspected line infections and 87 for other things. The conclusions of my talk is the placement of the central venous catheter is the safe procedure and can be managed in the transplant and intensive care facilities with acceptable rate of the complications that were provided by staff in adequately trained and safe CV line handling. This is the take-home message. We can take care of the central venous catheter by using the aseptic techniques. If we did a hand hygiene, hand washing, we wear the gloves, we should do the frequent stopper change, proper heparin flushes, monitor the signs of local induration or infections, avoid the local ointments, and remove the line when no longer line is required. I end my presentation with these words. हो इल्म की दौलत तो तहफ़्फ़ुज़ है यकीनी. No doubt the diseases are treated by the order of Almighty Allah, but by the grace of the God, the safety of the patient lies in our hands. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for such an informative talk. Next speaker is Ma'am Munazzam Bibi, a very competent and hardworking bone marrow transplant nurse. She had recently done her on-job training from UK Royal Free Hospital, also got her apheresis procedure training from Singapore. She will be sharing her research on mucositis in among patients undergoing bone marrow transplantation. Over to you, Ma'am Munazzam.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Munazzam, bone marrow transplant trained nurse from Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. I am going to deliver about mucositis among bone marrow transplant, among stem cell transplant patients. Mucositis is the painful inflammation and ulceration of the mucous membrane lining the digestive tract, usually at an adverse effect of chemotherapy and radiotherapy treatment for cancer. Mucositis can occur anywhere along the GI tract, but oral mucositis refer to the inflammation and ulcerations that occur in the mouth. Oral mucositis can affect up to 100% of patients undergoing high-dose chemotherapy and hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. 40% of patients receiving standard dose chemotherapy develop mucositis. 80% of patients receiving radiation therapy for head and neck cancer. 70% of all patients undergoing bone marrow transplantation. Alimentary tract mucositis increases mortality and morbidity and contribute to rising healthcare costs. Mucositis can be divided into 5 stages. First one is initiation phase, message generation phase, signaling phase, ulceration phase, and last one is healing phase. Mucositis characterized by damage to the epithelial of oropharyngeal cavity and GI tract, rapidly dividing basal cell of oral mucosa are among the body cell vulnerable to damage by chemotherapy and radiotherapies. Phases of mucositis, we already described you. These are the peaks of phases of mucositis. Clinical features, patient undergoing chemotherapy usually become symptomatic 4 to 5 days after beginning treatment, reaching at peak around day 10 and then slowly improving over the course of a few weeks. As a result of cell death and reaction to chemo or radiotherapies, the mucosal lining of the mouth becomes thin, may slough off, and then become red, inflamed, and ulcerated. Ulcer may become covered by yellowish white fibrin clot called a pseudomembrane, a symptomatic erythema, redness of oral cavity, erythema replaced by erosions, pain, xerostomia, dysgeusia, taste blindness. Oral mucositis can be very painful. The degree of pain is usually related to the extent of tissue damage. Pain is often described as a burning sensation accompanied by reddening. Due to pain, the patient may experience trouble in speaking, eating, or even opening the mouth. Grading of mucositis, there are 4 grades. Grade 1, soreness occur, but there are no ulcers. Grade 2, ulcer in mouth, but still able to eat solid food. Grade 3, no longer able to eat solid food, but can still swallow liquids. Grade 4, unable to swallow solid or liquid. Alimentation is impossible. WHO's oral toxicity scale, grade 1 soreness, erythema may or may not. Grade 2 erythema ulcer, patients can swallow solid food. Grade 3 ulcer with extensive erythema, patient can swallow food. Fourth one is mucositis to the extent that alimentation is not possible. Differential diagnosis, local denture related lesions, oral thrush, aphthous ulcers. Because these conditions can coexist in immunocompromised patient, differential diagnosis is critical. Treatment of mucositis is mainly supportive. Oral hygiene is the mainstay of treatment. Clean teeth for at least 90 seconds twice daily using a sterile gauze wrapping around the finger. Normal saline mouth rinses as much as possible. Add soda bicarb powder 1 TSF in 500 ml normal saline and do rinses. Mouthwashes may be used such as chlorhexidine and lidocaine for relief of pain. Mouth cleansing with diluted hydrogen peroxide to remove the pseudomembranes. Avoid tobacco, alcohol, citrus fruit and irritating foods such as hot, spicy, acidic or rough foods. Use a water-based moisturizer to protect lips. Drink plenty of fluid throughout the day. At least 1.2 liter is the recommended daily amount according to BSA. Sucking ice cubes can help to provide relief from the symptoms of oral mucositis. In grade 2 or 3 mucositis, the symptom of pain can be treated using paracetamol. In grade 3 or 4 mucositis, a strong painkiller such as morphine or tramadol may be required. Sores or ulceration can become infected by virus, bacteria or fungus. Pain and loss of taste perception makes it more difficult to eat, which leads to weight loss. Ulcer may act as a site for local infection and portal of entry for oral flora that in some instances may cause septicemia, especially in immunocompromised patients. Approximately half of all patients who receive chemotherapy develop such severe oral mucositis. Objective of my study is the frequency and predisposing factor associated with mucositis during stem cell transplant. Method was detailed evaluation of oral cavity, routine oral care, chlorhexidine, normal saline or nystatin, prophylactic antibiotics and antifungal, analgesics, WHO mucositis grading. Study duration was Jan 2009 till March 2013. Study population, patient undergoing hematopoietic stem cell transplant. Study design and observational study. Result was median age of patients was 18 years, median duration of hospital stay 34 days, mean absolute neutrophil counts 0.5 to 10 kDa per 9 per liter, mean duration of neutropenia 6 days. Incidence of mucositis was 22%. Total hematopoietic stem cell transplant during my study was 215. WHO mucositis graded grade 1 developed 18% mucositis, grade 2 13%, grade 3 was 15% and grade 4 was 2%. Conclusions. Mucositis is a complication among stem cell transplant recipients which can be managed with efficient and meticulous nursing care throughout the transplant period. Thank you for kind listening.
Thank you so much for such a comprehensive talk. So the questions are in the chat box. We will be dealing with them afterwards. Our next speaker is Shaheen Bhatt. She is currently providing her services of matron at CMH Panuakil Hospital. She is trained from Italy. She is one of the senior transplant nurse and her spark toward profession is exemplary. She is going to put a visor on infection control measures for neutropenic patients. Over to you, ma'am.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Shaheen Bhatt. I'm also a bone marrow transplant and oncology trained nurse. My topic is today infection control measures in neutropenic patients. This topic was already published with the name of nursing care in immunocompromised patients. The objectives of my today's lecture are to understand the neutropenia and its types, the symptoms and causes of neutropenia, the infection control measures to prevent patients from these complications. So let's start with the neutropenia, which consists on neutrophils, which are the most abundant type of WBCs in blood. They are the first responders whenever there is infection in the body. The short lifespan of neutrophil is 4 to 5 days in the circulation. The neutropenia means low neutrophil count. Neutrophil is a condition where the patient's ANC is less than 1500 cells per cubic millimeter. There are 4 types of neutropenia: congenital, cyclic, autoimmune, and idiopathic. The sign symptoms are fever, pneumonia, sinus infections, gingivitis, gum infection, omphalitis, or naval infections, and the skin abscesses. The causes of neutropenia are different diseases like leukemia, viral illnesses, severe aplastic anemia, Fanconi anemia, the conditions which affect the bone marrow failure, but it can be triggered with the chemotherapy, the radiotherapy, and with certain immunosuppressive drugs. But today we will be related with the febrile neutropenia, which is a complication of patients who are having neutropenia in bone marrow transplant or oncology wards. The febrile neutropenia is a single oral temperature more than 38.3 centigrade or temperature greater than 38 for 1 hour or more. The count will be less than 500 cells per cubic millimeter. The common complications of chemotherapy is febrile neutropenia. Even we can assess the importance of it, that mortality rate is 36% in cancer patients with this primary cause, and where this cause is secondary one, the mortality rate is 68%. It's the most common cause of mortality and morbidity in cancer patients, as the study indicates. So I think we should attempt it as a medical emergency like heart attack or stroke in cancer and bone marrow transplant patients. The high risk of neutropenia is there where the prolonged neutropenia more than 7 days, the profound neutropenia, the absolute count is less than 100, and where the patient have medical and comorbid conditions. In that situation, the admission is the first attempt, and afterwards blood cultures should be taken immediately, and the antibiotic dose should be intimated within 60 minutes of presentation according to the hospital antibiogram where the patient is going to be treated. The hospital acquired infections or healthcare acquired infections or nosocomial infections all are the big source of this neutropenia. Healthcare associated infections can be defined as those occurring within 48 hours of healthcare setup, admissions, or 3 days of discharge, or 30 days of an operation. That healthcare infections are very long away addressed by our pioneer nurse Florence Nightingale. One of the quote of Florence Nightingale is, the very first requirement in a hospital is that it should do the sick no harm. Health associated infections are looked after like care bundles. That care bundles are consist on CAR-T, CLABSI, SSI, VAP, and needle stick injury. CAR-T is urinary tract infection, CLABSI is bloodstream infection, SSI is surgical site infections, VAP is ventilator associated pneumonia. The needle stick injury transmits HIV, hepatitis B, syphilis, malaria, and herpes to the healthcare workers. Let's have a look on the importance of infection prevention and control. This in IPC program is started by the WHO in 2000, and it was later on stressed every year to do these activities on their different hospitals, and they have got the study which is showing these results, that how much this effective was. The WHO has started this as Infection Prevention and Control Global Unit. This is the website, and here they are teaching the nurses and healthcare workers with different online courses also. Like this, the online courses consist all the infection control activities which the nurses and healthcare workers could get at their own places. Like this, I have done this standard precaution environmental cleaning and disinfection, and they have provided you the certificates also. The type of precautions which we should take care can be divided into standard universal precautions and transmission-based precautions. Transmission-based precautions can be subdivided into contact, droplet, and airborne precautions. What are the standard precautions? The standard precautions were formerly known as universal precautions and body fluid precautions. Later on, the both are given one name, and that is standard precautions. The standard precautions contain isolation and barrier nursing. Let's start with the isolation nursing. There are two types of isolation nursing. One is controlling and one is preventing the infection. The source infection, the source isolation, which is also called barrier nursing. The protective isolation, which is called reverse barrier nursing. The barrier nursing, we will start with the hand washing. And the picture which you are seeing on the right is the father of hand washing. The name is Ignaz Semmelweis, a Hungarian physician who delivered the babies in the Vienna General Hospital, and at that time he started learning that the babies which are born by the doctors were having more infection rate as compared to the ward where the midwives were delivering the babies. When he catered it and come to know that hand washing was the single measure which was taken by the midwives more frequently as compared to the doctors. Nearly 20% of the mothers under the doctor care in that ward died following childbirth. And at the right of the slide, we could see again our pioneer nurse Florence Nightingale, who in her book Notes on Nursing in 1860, consisting that she wrote that every nurse ought to be careful to wash her hands very frequently during the day in her face too, so much the better. So if she could wash her face also, it will be better. So she insisted the idea of Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, who gave this idea in 1845. The 5 moments of hand washing, every nurse knows when to wash hands in hospital, in wards. These are the additional hand washing moments by WHO. When hands are visibly soiled, the patient is experiencing vomiting or diarrhea. There is a direct hand contact with bodily fluids, and if the gloves were not worn, there is an outbreak of norovirus, Clostridium difficile, or other diarrheal illnesses. After using the toilet, before and after preparing, handling, or eating food, after an aseptic technique, after removal of gloves, at the start of the shift and at the end of the shift of the nurses, after completing a task, that is cleaning equipments. The duration of hand hygiene by the WHO is recommended as hand washing 40 to 60 seconds and the hand rub 20 to 30 seconds. The hand disinfection is the combination of both. When we wash our hands and afterwards we apply the rub. The take-home message by this slide is the hand washing day, which is celebrated by the WHO on 5th of May every year. For that time duration, we have made a research that if we read Darood Sharif, the longer one, 2 times, the time will be 40 to 60 seconds. And if we read it one time, the time will be 20 to 30 seconds, which is used for the hand rub. The barrier nursing contains personal protective equipments. Equipments contain all the masks, gowns, viral suits, shoe covers, and etc. But I will like to stress on the simple face mask which we all apply in medical and surgical wards. This mask contains 3 layers. The first layer, which is outer one, it is hydrophobic non-woven layer which prevents the bacteria, blocks visibly objects. The second is middle layer, melt blown filter, which protects the air, viruses and bacteria, and the inner layer, which is soft absorbent non-woven layer, which protects our skin from the moistness which our skin produces. The barrier nursing next contains decontamination or environmental cleaning of the hospital or the units. This decontamination can be dealt with cleaning, disinfection and sterilization. The levels of disinfection are 3. The first one is high level disinfection, which can be expected to destroy all microorganisms with the exception of large numbers of bacterial spores. The examples are formaldehyde, hydrogen peroxide, glutaraldehyde. The intermediate disinfection, which inactivates Mycobacterium tuberculosis, vegetative bacteria, most viruses and most fungi. It does not necessarily kill bacterial spores. The examples are bleach and hydrogen peroxide blends. The low level of disinfection can kill most bacteria, some viruses and some fungi. Cannot be relied on to kill the resistant microorganisms such as tubercle bacilli or bacterial spores. These disinfectants contain phenol, alcohol and sodium hypochlorite. The methods of sterilization are physical, chemical or gaseous. In physical heat, the sunlight, drying and heat is there. In chemical, the alcohol, halogens, dyes, aldehyde are there to dealt with it. The gaseous mode of sterilization contains zircon, formaldehyde, ethylene oxide. This is one of the example of physical method, and this is one of the example of chemical method. The gaseous method contains recently zircon. The laparoscopic instruments are used to sterilize with Oroline. The Oroline is a product free of aldehyde, phenol and chlorine. It's compatible with the stainless steel and most non-metal materials including acrylic, glass, polyethylene, PVC and silicone. The prevention of injuries from sharps is another infection control activity which should be addressed. It should be addressed with hands-free transfer of the sharps. Like in this picture, this is the example of sharp syringe transferring to another person. This should not happen, but this is the method to transfer these objects to another healthcare professional. And if the injury occurs, the exposure is there to different diseases, and this diseases should be addressed afterwards by the vaccination. For hepatitis B, immune globulin and hepatitis B vaccine can be reducing the risk of infection. And for hepatitis C, there is no post-exposure prophylaxis available for hepatitis C, neither immune globulin nor antiviral drugs shown to reduce the risk of hepatitis C transmission. So, care is the most important intimation in it. Safe disposal of sharps is important healthcare and infection control activity. In it, we should not recap the syringes or bend it or to break these needles before disposal, and do not remove the needles from the syringe by hand. Dispose of needles and syringes immediately after use in a puncture resistant sharp disposal container. This is the example of that sharp resistant container. The waste disposal management should be done properly, as the WHO recommended that these are the colors for the segregation and for disposal of different infectious and non-infectious objects. The methods of waste management are incineration, chemical disinfection, wet and dry thermal treatment, microwave irradiation, land disposal, and inertization. Another problem which we are facing in these units where the neutropenia is very common, the antimicrobial resistance. This antimicrobial resistance is an urgent and global health issue also by the WHO and the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, also called it a global health issue. Antibiotic resistance is the ability of bacteria to withstand the antimicrobial power of antibiotics. In other words, an antibiotic that previously cured an infection does not work as well anymore, or may not work at all to kill the bacteria. The rates of resistance to antibiotic continue to rise due to overuse of antibiotics. The bacteria which are resistant now are MRSA, VRE, CRE, C. difficile, multi-drug resistant Acinetobacter, Pseudomonas, rifampicin resistant, drug resistant Neisseria gonorrhea. What to do to delete this antimicrobial resistance is overprescription of antibiotics should be prevented. The patient should not finishing the entire antibiotic course if the doctor has advised for 5 days, but the symptoms are cleared in 1 or 2 days. Usually the patients finish this dose. This also causes the antimicrobial resistance. The overuse of antibiotics in livestock and fish farming is the another cause. The poor infection control in healthcare settings and the poor hygiene and sanitation are the other causes of these antimicrobial resistance. Another anti-infective activity which we should cater for is the clean room classification for the neutropenia patients. The basis of clean room standards is the micrometer. Our micron for short, which is the size of particles to be filtered. Some classifications do not require certain particle sizes to be tested because the respective concentrations are too low or too high. The particle counting is the procedure which we could do for assessment of this clean room cleanliness. The different filters like HEPA filters, biosafety cabinets, and HVAC systems are another infection preventive activity which should be done on these neutropenia centers. The oral hygiene is already explained by one of my colleagues in detail, is a big matter to address so that the patients should not have infection in neutropenia. So at end, the trainings on this IPC is started by WHO, and we should start at our own centers regressively to evaluate these infections on neutropenia patients in education and training, so that the neutropenia patients should not have many attempts to delay their neutropenia. These were my references, and thank you very much for kind listening.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such a comprehensive talk. Obviously, the audience can email you the questions. Moving on towards our next talk, next speaker is Kishwar Sultana, my mentor, my teacher, and undoubtedly the most expert bone marrow transplant nurse. She got her training from Royal Hospital UK and Royal Marsden Hospital UK. She is also registered from UK Nursing Council. Ma'am Kishwar is currently heading nurses at Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. Ma'am Kishwar will throw light upon apheresis procedures and related complications.
I am Ganekeshwar Sultana. I am a bone marrow transplant nurse at Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center. Today I am going to present a topic on apheresis. Apheresis is a Greek word. It means to carry away. In this, the blood is taken from the donor or the patient. The required components are collected and remaining are returned or reinfused to the donor or the patient. Donor must meet the following criteria. Age must be above 18 years with the blood complete pictures, blood grouping cross match, hepatitis B, C screening, and drug history. If donor is on drug, especially as aspirin, it should be discontinued 3 days before and after. And the written informed consent is also necessary. Regarding indication of the hemapheresis, the collected components for transfusion purposes are platelet apheresis, leukapheresis, plasmapheresis, and peripheral blood stem cell apheresis. And number 2 is the remove the pathological components, which is used for therapeutic purposes, as in chronic myeloid leukemia. Regarding methodology, apheresis machine is used to collect the components, and this machine is of 2 types. One is intermittent flow centrifuge, and second is continuous flow centrifuge. In intermittent flow centrifuge, blood is collected from the donor via the collection pump, and it is centrifuged in the centrifuge in the machine, and is required components are collected and remaining are returned to the patient or the donor. It's a cyclic procedure, and it will take the more time, and only one IV access is required for return and inlet. In continuous flow centrifuge, the blood is taken from the donor or the patient. It enters into the chamber via the inlet pump. The required components is collected and remaining are returned to the donor or the patient via the return line. So 2 lines are used. One is access and second is return line. Regarding principle of apheresis, the whole blood is taken, and more dense components like red cells are in the bottom, and then followed by the white blood cells, and then platelets and plasma on the top. In this slide, we can see the mechanism of apheresis. In this, the 2 veins are required. One is for access. Using a kit, the 16 number needle is used, and CV line of 14 number is used. Single lumen line is used for access, and for return IV cannula number 20 or 18 are used. By using apheresis machine, the whole blood is withdrawn from the donor or the patient, mixed with anticoagulant. It separates into the components: plasma, platelets, WBCs, and red blood cells. The required components are collected and remaining are reinfused to the donor or the patient. Now coming on to the platelet apheresis, it's the removal of the platelets with return of the plasma, WBCs, and red blood cells. It takes 100 minutes to 2 hours, or depending upon the height and weight and pre-platelet count of the donor. These platelets can be stored in agitator at room temperature from 20 to 22 degrees for 5 days, and they are kept in agitator where they keep on moving so as to prevent from clumping of the platelets. Indications for transfusion of platelet are the thrombocytopenia, aplastic anemia, and bone marrow transplant patients. Leukapheresis is the removal of the leukocytes with reinfusion of the red blood cells, platelet, and plasma. Indications for patients: the patients with high count, as in acute myeloid leukemia and chronic myeloid leukemia, in hyperviscosity syndrome, and for donation purposes to treat the sepsis like granulocyte apheresis. Plasma apheresis is the removal of the plasma. It's mixed with anticoagulant and separated into the components with return of the separated cellular components to the donor or the patient. If large amount of plasma is removed, it is exchanged with the plasma. The fluid normal saline can also be used as an exchange. Indications of plasma apheresis are the myasthenia gravis patients, hyperviscosity syndrome, and TTP, where defective antibodies and cells are removed. Now coming to the hematopoietic stem cell apheresis, stem cells are used for autologous and allogenic bone marrow transplant. And in autologous BMT, the cells are mobilized by stem cells are mobilized by using the granulocyte stimulating factors, and CD34 is to ensure the good quality of the product. These are the collected stem cells, and they are kept at 4 degrees centigrade in blood bank. Although the apheresis is very safe procedure, however, some of the complications may occur during or after the procedure, and that can be divided into local reactions as hematoma at the site of insertion, pain and swelling at the site of extravasation. Local phlebitis and thrombophlebitis are very rare. Systemic reactions may occur, and these may be pallor, sweating, nausea, hypertension, bradycardia, and these may aggravate due to the pain at the site of venipuncture, and also feeling of donating a platelet, having attention of this. Citrate reactions are commonly due to the acid citrate dextrose, which is used during the apheresis, as ACDA combines the calciums with it and thus reducing the calcium in the blood. The sign symptoms of citrate reactions are numbness or tingling, chills, feeling of tightness, feeling of vibrations, muscle twitching, rapid or slow pulse, shortness of breath, and vomiting. And these may be controlled by slowing down the procedure, by pausing the procedure, or by giving the IV calcium gluconate during procedure. Hemolysis is one of complication of during apheresis. In this, donor red cells may be damaged during apheresis, releasing the hemoglobin. It may be due to the equipment malfunctioning, kinks or obstruction of the tubing during loading the kit, incorrect installation of the equipment, or other equipment failure, or incompatible replacement fluid, as mistakenly glucose 5% is used instead of the normal saline during kit priming. It can be recognized by pink or red plasma or blood in the lines. At the end, I would like to conclude that apheresis is a vital but complicated procedure that can be undertaken by nurses who have the necessary skills and understands the procedure. The operator should have specialized knowledge of the functions and operations of apheresis equipment. Apheresis nurses should have several technical skills like managing the venous access and return line. That if they are not able to manage the access line, the procedure cannot be carried out correctly. And similarly, if they are not able to manage the return lines, the blood cannot be returned to the patient, arising complications. Monitoring of extracorporeal volume and anticoagulant is essential for successful completion of the procedure. Thank you very much for kind listening.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your sharing your expertise with us. Our next speaker is Dr. Arshi Naz from Hyderabad. She is assistant professor at Liaquat University of Medical Sciences, Jamshoro. She has more than 50 publications. She will be going to further educate us about on the role of nurses in diagnostic hematology. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'm really thankful to Pakistan Society of Hematology and organizers of HematCon 2021 who invited me and provided such a nice opportunity to sharing my knowledge with you and learn with you and our participants. And Assalamu alaikum to everyone, and Subha Bakhair and good afternoon. And today my topic is to discuss with you role of nurses in diagnostic hematology. I'm Arshi, working as an assistant professor in Liaquat University of Medical and Health Sciences, Jamshoro. I have no disclosure at any point as an employee, adjunct faculty, or different membership of the societies. And if you have any doubt or any query, please write message and send it in the chat box. I will try my best to communicate you in an easy way. A recorded version will also be available on the site of HematCon 2021. Although Florence Nightingale, who is the founder of modern nursing, started nursing in 1853, but in Pakistan after independence it is established in 1948. But Pakistan Nursing Council constituted in 1953. Before 1990, in Pakistan, hematological facilities were almost non-existent in Pakistan. In Pakistan Society of Hematology raised or constituted in 1991. Although some of the nurses trained in hematology and transplant setting in early 19 or late 1980s, but practice started in as a hematological or GMT nurse in 1995. Total 75,000 nurses out of a 200 million population, and according to the WHO, 0.66 per thousand, which whole disciplines, even cardiac, hematology, and so on. So it is the number is quite low as per population. As we know, hematological disorders are more prevalent in our country, like thalassemia, hemophilia, bleeding disorders, and malignant disorders. That's divided into two categories in terms of numbers or in terms of membrane defects like anemias and polycythemia and hereditary spherocytosis. WBC disorders categorize in two subgroups, non-neoplastic and neoplastic. In non-neoplastic leukemia and leukocytosis, and neoplastic like leukemia, acute and chronic, and lymphomas. And qualitative and quantitative platelet disorder also comprises an increase in thrombocythemia, like essential thrombocythemia and thrombocytopenia for ITP, and altered in function Glanvin thrombocythemia and Bernard-Solier. So nurses are the first line defense in our first line health care provider in our society or in worldwide. So lots of responsibilities in their shoulders. First, when he or she started to meet the patient and take the history. History is very, very quite important. Always listen to patient through structured questionnaires. And the next one is the vitals documentation of symptoms or any notes. Now, so in some of healthcare settings, paperless or electronic, but still paper and electronic media is working in this setting. Patient monitoring, health treatment plan according to and followed to physician or clinician, and lots of queries they resolved in day to day or time to time according to specialty and subunits, nursing patient attendants, different medical units like cardiac labs and radiology. And another one is next one is the drug administration, which is also a responsibility of the nurses. And then at the time of discharge, patient counseling. After this discharge, they're taking care at home, specimen collection, which we'll discuss in the later slides, and insertion of or giving the catheterization to the patient in different ways, management of the patient, and especially in the pain management. And now we are going through the COVID-19 scenario of COVID-19 pandemic. So point of care testing also. Where do hematology nurses work? Blood disorder clinics like thalassemia, hemophilia, the bone marrow transplant clinic, or MDS and hospitals, pediatric cancer, oncology, bone marrow, and paper assisted. Laboratory testing procedure is quite a long procedure, and it is divided into three categories: pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical. In analytical phase, pre-analytical, we will discuss in detail in the later slides, and specimen nurse communication of the nurse is in case of an analytical case, in case of any query in the samples, or in case of any urgency of the test results, or any urgent test requirements, and then clinical response to results, and communicate the physician and get the next one. And always remember these points in your mind. The first one is the request form. What are the prerequisite environment of the request form? We will discuss in the next slide. Test scheduling is quite much more important. Like if patient is on warfarin, or at what time you have to send the samples, and at what time you have to collect the samples if patient is on warfarin. And in the next picture, if you will see in the next picture, there is the dialyzed patient during dialysis. You can't collect the samples, or at what time on the patient of the dialysis you can collect the specimen, and which type of investigation you can done. And in the scheduling, if you will see in the next picture, like this cryoprecipitate and plasma. After infusion of cryoprecipitate and infusion, during infusion or post infusion, at what time you can collect the specimen, like in hemophilia A monitoring. The next one is the line, which is quite much more important, and many of the errors during the collection of the specimen through lines, because as we know, heparin contamination present in the line, because to prevent the clot. So if you will see, there's the clips, three different colors. One is for blood, one is for replacement of fluid, and another one is supplements. So you have to collect the blood, which policies are documented in your place area, and you have to follow these instructions as per policies, and remove the blood 6.5 to 10 ml before collection of a specimen for any type of testing. And the next one is the gauge of the needle. For infant is 24, and for adult 21 gauge. And site of the collection is very important to differentiate between venous vein and artery. And next one is don't open the tube, because you are using the Vacutainer, so you just insert through the cap. And the rejection and acceptance policy, or the minimum sample requirements, plus minus 10% of the specimen are accepted, and if use any additive or anticoagulant inside the collection tube, like trisodium citrate and EDTA, so don't make a lassi or avoid vigorous shaking. In case of polycythemia rubra vera, you should ask the tube for adjustment of anticoagulant. Otherwise, you will get the erroneous results due to anticoagulant and blood ratio. And order of draw and selection of anticoagulant is again an important part. Selection of anticoagulant in which tube or in which anticoagulant you have to collect this specimen like CBC, EDTA, and trisodium in blue top, and you should see the order of collection draw. In the next one, identification is quite common, quite important because in the most setting for patient wristband, unique ID, MR number, and lab ID used for the identification of a specimen. And the transportation again in the most important, like in COVID-19 scenario, we use triple packing or liver that has infectious samples, and as well as we live in hot temperature areas. In summer, temperature rises till 39 or 40. So temperature controlled uh, transportation box must be used. And sometimes we should keep in mind urgency of the test level and requirement of the test, like platelet aggregation. You can't collect in the ward because from ward to dispatchment in the lab around 2 hours. So in case of like in PT, prothrombin time, 12 hours you can perform, but in case of heparin or anticoagulant, you can't. You have to perform within 2 hours. And patient factors like newborn, pregnancy, lipemic samples, ecteric samples, prior problems, and hemolysis. So you should keep in mind these factors impact give the impact on the results. So mention and keep follow the policies and procedure according to their area. And communication is a quite important. And nurses through communicated LIMS, laboratory information system, hospital information management system, online softwares, mobiles, and direct telephone calls. Infection control, Ms. Yahin, but telling us in detail. In request form content, important is a full name, ID, location, attending physician, age, sex, marital status, lab ID number, patient or referring center, history, product infusion, medication history, and dietary history. Ordering test, if you want a desired INR, so you will order the test. Prothrombin time, anti-10A and factor 10A, you have to make a difference in between. Factor 5 Leiden is a thrombosis marker, and factor 5 is a clotting for factor proteins and clotting proteins. Factor 8, sometimes we are not used to factor difference between Roman numbers, factor 8 and factor 7. So give the different results or in factor 11 and factor 9 as well. Point of care testing defined as diagnostic facilities near, at or near the point of care. There is some conflict of interest, although point of care testing involves an expanded role of nurses that overlap with that of laboratory technicians. But now the requirement in some areas like ICU, OT, some units like bleeding disorder, hemophilia unit, and chemotherapeutic units, and bone marrow transplant. And skills of hematology nurse required education must meet educational requirements, certification, completion, and empathy, listening, and communication skills, or attention to detail, the ability to think quickly and critically, a strong support system, continuous education and recertification in different subspecialties. Point of care testing, like we are living in the artificial intelligence era, some of hematology analyzer replace the cumbersomeness of slide making and watching, and they give the information regarding the numbers and red cell, platelet, and white cell disorders in term, and as well as reticulocyte count, malaria, parasites, and as well as immune chromatographic testing for malaria, and as well as the low throughput for coagulation testing for PT, APT, TT, and clotting factors and hemocults over blood, and a very, very special technique or equipment used at thromboelastography, which check hemostatic abnormalities in different hemostatic abnormalities identified and give the clue for management of transfusion medicine, as well as we are now dealing since 1.5 years for COVID-19 and now MERS and SARS-2. So overwhelming of patients and overburden of patients to select in the triage and to go to emergency. So reduce the time, reduce the exposure, or less the exposure of the people, less labor required, and so that's why we need the point of care testing in related areas like emergency ICU wards and these fires settings. POCT process, point of care testing process, required quite long process behind placement of these techniques in that area. First to plan and selection of POCT equipment, devices, and it's an ultimately responsibility of the quality management department of that setting and training and proper quality assurance testing. With lots of responsibility, it's quite difficult, but keep balance. Must keep balance in between descriptions, job descriptions, and tasks. Thank you so much, and I will end my presentation. Learning never stops, but during this pandemic, global pandemic, our frontline nurses have strong muscles and marvelously fight against the corona in limited resources in terms of facilities and manpower. And thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you so much for such an educating talk. Our next speaker is Ma'am Farah from Quaid-e-Azam International Hospital. She is working as a head nurse in bone marrow transplant unit of Quaid-e-Azam International Hospital. She has a vast experience of managing transplant patients, and she will be sharing with us cyclosporin toxicity among bone marrow transplant recipients. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sadaf. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm Farah Imran. I retired from Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center, and currently I am working at Bone Marrow Transplant Center, Quaid-e-Azam International Hospital, with Major General retired Parvez Ahmed, who is our head of department. It's a great privilege and honor for me to be here to present at this forum. Hope the session will be interactive and interesting. The topic I'll discuss today is cyclosporin toxicity among bone marrow transplant patients. These are my sequences. In hematopoietic stem cell transplant, immunosuppression is required for the prevention of transplant rejection and graft versus host disease. Cyclosporin is the most important drug that has revolutionized the bone marrow transplant outcomes, as the long-term use of cyclosporin may lead to many systemic toxic effects that has a direct clinical impact on the patient. These are the cells of the immune system. All cells are being produced from the mother cell. Okay. All cells are being produced from the mother cell, that is called stem cell. Stem cell divided into two main progenitor cells, lymphoid progenitor stem cells and myeloid progenitor stem cells. Finally, B lymphocyte, T lymphocyte, and natural killer are being produced from the lymphoid chain of the progenitor cell, and red blood cell, platelets, granulocyte, eosinophils, and neutrophils are being produced from the myeloid chain of the progenitor stem cell. Cyclosporin A. Cyclosporin is a calcineurin inhibitor used in immunosuppression protocols for hematopoietic stem cell transplant. It is a natural product and it obtained from a fungus. It was introduced in 1977 and it can be taken by mouth or by injection into a vein. Pharmacology. Cyclosporin is a lipophilic immunosuppressive peptide which selectively inhibits the T lymphocytes activation in response to antigen stimulation. It is available in syrup, capsules, and injection forms. Capsules are available in 25, 50, and 100 mg. Syrup contains 100 mg per ml and injection 50 mg per ml, available in the ampule of 5 ml. Mechanism of action. Cyclosporin suppresses T cell mediated immune response. The main mechanism of cyclosporin is inhibition of T lymphocytes function. Cyclosporin inhibits the intracellular enzyme calcineurin by binding to cyclophilins, which then inhibit calcineurin mediated production of cytokines such as interleukin 2. This diagram shows how cyclosporin works. Normally, when antigen exposed to the lymphocyte, calcineurin get activated. With the activation of calcineurin, this nuclear factor calcineurin dephosphorize the dephosphorylation of nuclear factor of activated cell done. With the dephosphorylation, it enters into the nucleus and then it raises the production of the interleukin 2 and increase the production and multiplication of the lymphocytes. When cyclosporin entered into the lymphocyte, the cyclophilins bind the calcineurin. So, with the inhibition of calcineurin, there is no dephosphorylation occur, and there is no entry into the cell, no release of interleukin 2, and there is no production and multiplication of the lymphoids. How cyclosporin used in the bone marrow transplant? Cyclosporin is usually used at day -2, and then at day +6 dose can be reduced after assessing the cyclosporin level into the blood, and after the neutrophil recovery it can be shifted to the oral formulation, and cyclosporin continue for 6 to 12 months according to the transplant of the patient and according to the type of the transplant. Cyclosporin calcineurin inhibitors, the dose of cyclosporin is 2.5 mg per kg twice daily, and it started from day -2, 1.5 mg per kg from day +6 if we achieve the desired level of the cyclosporin in blood. CSA level 200 to 300 nanogram per milliliter in aplastic anemia and bone marrow beta thalassemia major, and the CSA level remained between 150 to 200 considered normal in malignancies. The oral dose of cyclosporin is 5 to 6 mg per kg per day and usually started after the engraftment. The side effects of cyclosporin. Long-term use of cyclosporin is required in transplant patients, so it may cause many toxic effect on recipient. The most common side effects are hypertension, hyperkalemia, hypertrichosis, hypertrophy of gum, hepatotoxicity, and hyperuricemia. Some common side effects are tremors, restlessness, stomach upset, nausea, cramps, diarrhea, headache, and changes in blood sugar. Some side effects of cyclosporin are more likely occur in pediatric patients who are taking high doses of medications like sinus drainage or runny nose, hot flashes, delayed kidney functions, and increased risk of infection. Some rare side effects of cyclosporin are sore throat, unusual bleeding or bruising, trouble breathing, confusion, blurred vision, stomach pain, hearing difficulty, chest pain, and fatigue. We did study on the toxic effect of cyclosporin at our bone marrow transplant center, Quaid-e-Azam International Hospital. We did 35 transplants till now, and 31 transplants were included in these studies. The total transplant were 35, 33 were allogenic transplant, 3 were haplo bone marrow transplant, and 2 were autologous transplant. 25 transplant done for beta thalassemia major, 1 for Fanconi's anemia, 1 for AML, 1 for ALL, 2 for aplastic anemia, 1 for CML, and 1 for MDS. The mean age of the patients were 13 years. The age range was between 2 to 63 years. And 11 were female, 21 male, and 14 were sex mismatch between recipient and the donor. And ABO mismatch were 9, 2 major and 7 minor. And approximate date to neutrophil recovery was +12, day, and the platelet recovery day was plus 14. This is the percentage of my study result. 96.77% got hypertension, 3.2% patient got hyperkalemia, 90% patient got hypertrichosis, 12.9% patient got hypertrophy gum, and 100% patient had the hyperpigmentation, and 3.2% got neurotoxicity. 4 patients were switched over to the tacrolimus due to the severe CSA induced side effects. This is the graphic presentation. 30 out of 31 got the hypertension, 28 patients got hypertrichosis and hyperpigmentation. All of them have the hyperpigmentation, 31 and 4 gum hypertrophy. Conclusion. Cyclosporine is an important drug which lead to improve the bone marrow transplant outcome. It is associated with significant side effects and it required close monitoring, especially blood sugar and renal functions. Hypertension is the commonest side effect seen after cyclosporine administration. It was all about my presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you for your kind listening.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Farah, for such a comprehensive talk. Let's move towards the question and answer session.
We have not received any question and answers here, but they would be emailed to the presenters. With this, we come to the end of this very successful nurses session. I'm first of all really grateful to Pakistan Society of Hematology organizers, especially the President, Major General Parvez Ahmed Hilali Imtiaz Military, Chairperson, Professor Nuzhat Mushahid, and the whole team for allocating special time for the nurses session. In my humble opinion, the empowerment of the nurses is the only key to success, because the exact survival and successful treatment outcome lies in the aseptic techniques of the nurses. So the doctors come, they see the patients, advise the treatment, and they go away. The nurses are with the patients 24/7. CV line is there, cannulas are there. So if the nurses know the aseptic techniques, you can have better results. At our Institute Armed Forces Bone Marrow Transplant Center, we are holding very regular continuous nursing education activities for more than a decade now, and I can see the results. All these my students did very well. They had such a beautiful presentations, comprehensive results, and very scientific knowledge imparted to the audience. I hope all of you had a great learning experience. I'm really thankful. I express my deepest gratitude to all the presenters. Free papers by Najia, Munazzam, Farah, and Arshinaz. Lectures by Madam Kishwar and Madam Shaheen. Every talk was so special and was so educating for the audience that I'm really glad that we held a nurses session. Over to Dr. Tariq Khattak, my colleague panelist. Kandari Khattak is a pediatrician and very closely associated with the nurses, because most of our patients are children, and he has to order very specific techniques for taking care of the children. Khattak, any?
Thank you, madam. I fully agree with Dr. Mehreen that basically we physicians definitely play an important role in diagnosing these patients and then we taking them to transplant. But actually 24 hours care is provided by the nursing staff. So they are the actual nursing staff is the most important pillar, and as I also agree with General Parvez including in the initial remarks, that if we concentrate more on their training and they have a good training and good knowledge, that will improve the outcome of transplant patient and the patient being treated with chemotherapy. And I also appreciate the efforts of PSH for a separate session for the nursing, and inshallah with the passage of time these sessions will improve and there will be more separate session for the nurses in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I must appreciate the excellent moderation by Sadaf. I really felt like being myself at the place of moderator. Thank you very much, everybody. Hope to have more sessions of nurses, more conferences, more paper presentation, because they're brilliant girls with excellent ideas, with a very educated background, and now they're coming up so well. So hemo-oncology, hematology, and transplantation is not possible without advanced knowledge of the nurses. Thank you very much, everybody.